My name's Eric Sanzone. I went to the regional in Queens, New York that was being hosted by Gamer's Choice. I went 8-1 and got 4th place with Generators. And this is my deck profile. So we're going to start off with 3 Lopter. Then we have 3 Vala. And then for the one of boss monsters, we have Mardell, Har, Hela, and Utgarda. Lopter is usually normally the best normal summon you want for the deck. He also helps facilitate your hand, so if you don't have boss stage in your opening hand, helps you summon out Mardell, and Mardell is the searcher of the deck, and it searches any generator card. So even if you open up boss stage, it helps you can add any of the other bosses, you can add any of the traps if you play any of the traps, or just boss stage in general. But if I have boss stage in hand already, it's mostly probably going to be adding either Lopter or Vala 90% of the time. But mostly, in my opinion, will be Vala if I have another boss in hand, because Vala helps facilitate making rank 9 plays, which would be Leviathan, which is the new or more recent XC rank 9 that they released for generators. Or if I opened up Monstrosity in my hand, I would be leaning towards making Enter Blathnir to basically so you can rip 2 cards out your opponent's hand and ending on a F0, which helps facilitate your board and protect your boss stage from getting ashed the following turn. So if you after that establish your board, you would have. If you have Lopter out, you would summon out Lopter off boss stage during your opponent's turn, and then Lopter would summon out, most of the time, either Har or Utgarda, depending on the deck you're playing against. Har is the Omni-Negate of the deck, and also has another effect when your opponent adds a card from the deck to their hand besides the draw phase. Once per turn, you can activate his effect and makes your opponent send a monster from their hand or field to the graveyard, but they get to choose. So that's the only downside of the card. Because if they have any bad cards in their hand, they can send it to the graveyard so they can try to unclog their hand. Or if they have a monster that, when it's sent to the graveyard, gives them a better advantage of trying to break your board, which kind of sucks. But him being an Omni-Gate as well, it also helps a lot to facilitate plays. But depending on what deck you play against, it also can backfire on you. But in my opinion, it's a really good card, and I love this card. It's probably my favorite card in all Yu-Gi-Oh! And then Utgarda, probably the best matchups in his cards that rely on getting into the graveyard, because he tributes to generators and or rock monsters to target a card on the field and banish it. So this card came up a lot during the 2 Unchained matchups I played against, and it helped try to secure my win so I can have a better crackback, and then instead of them having follow-up during my turn to keep me from not breaking their board. And then Hela, most of the time, with Hela and Vala, if you get them summoned off a Monstrosity, you can end up making double Enter Blathnir and ripping 2 cards out their hand, which is also really strong. Then for other normal summons, I have 2 Diviner, and with the Diviner package, I have 1 Trias and the 1 DD Sprite. So Diviner is also a good normal summon of the deck, but also facilitates making a 1-card Baron combo, because you would normal summon Diviner, and then you would send typically Trias, and then Trias, when it's in your hand or in graveyard, you can tribute up to 3 fairies, special summon itself, and it gains effects depending on how many fairies you tributed. But most of the time you're going to be tributing 1, which would be obviously Diviner, and then it would summon itself. And then since Diviner was tributed, it can summon a level 2 or lower fairy from your hand or deck besides itself. So you'd be summoning DD Sprite, and since it's a level 1 fairy tuner, you have 9 and 1 makes 10, make a Baron. But Trias gets banished when it leaves the field. So it's kind of unfortunate because your generator tokens are fairies. So if you have 3 generator tokens on your field, you can, and this card's in your hand or in graveyard, you can go Trias, tribute 3 generator tokens, special it, and then it all happens in the same effect, where since you attributed 2 or more, you get to destroy a card your opponent controls, and then you get to draw 2 cards, which is also really strong. This came up a couple of times, and I was happy it did, because I was able to destroy a opponent's back row, which was a summon limit, and then I drew 2 cards, and it was a follow-up of Lopter plus a Ash Blossom, which also was really helpful to basically almost OTK them on my following turn. But overall, I think it's a really good package, and it doesn't just have to send Trias, it can also send another fairy, and it happens to be that Lopter and Vala are fairies. And the best thing about most of the time is you are sending, if you have Trias in hand, you can, and you have another Generator boss, we'll say you have like Mardell in hand, you can go normal summon Diviner effect, and then you would send Vala, and then you would Trias from hand, attributing the Diviner to summon out Trias. And since obviously Diviner was attributed, you can summon out DD Sprite from deck, and then you make Baron, and then you go Vala, send the Mardell, summon Vala, and then since Vala was special summoned, you can summon Mardell, and Mardell gets you boss stage, and then you also have, then you get to overlay them for a rank 9, which is really strong. So ending on more interruptions is always the best thing to do. And then before the hand traps, the last 3 other monsters I played were 3 Fenrir. I had this card in the side, and I had Nib in the main. And then the night before, I was discussing with myself of how Nib versus Fenrir would be against certain decks for the day. And I believe Fenrir was a better card because it is a really good card, and it establishes really good board presence. Because by itself, it obviously can out SP Little Knight, and also establishes a stronger going first board, because ending on Fenrir plus Baron plus Leviathan makes it more difficult for your opponent to get over, because they have to worry about boss stage triggering, they have to worry about Fenrir banishing a face-up card they control, they have to worry about Baron omni-negating, then they have to worry about Leviathan typically attaching 2 cards to Jormungandr from their field or graveyard. So I felt this was the stronger card to put in instead of Nib, and it happened to work in my favor because this card probably saved me 100 times during that day, and I'm really grateful that I was able to use this card in the main and didn't listen to the back of my head that was telling me put Nibs in the main, and I was happy that I didn't listen to that. And then for the hand traps, I played 3 Ash, 3 Valor, 3 Droll, and then 3 Imperm. Also, the Droll is a really strong card in my opinion right now because for the combo heavy decks, but I was running into other combo decks that weren't really dead if you Droll them. They were able to continue to play through it, so most of the time I was signing up the Drolls for Nibs. And depending on the ban list, if combo decks are still heavily around, that are the decks that are heavily impacted by Droll, then I would probably keep Droll in the main. But if they go, then I'll probably put Nib in the main eventually, because Nib's probably the better deck killer for combo boards, and I don't really have to worry about Nib, because as long as I have boss stage up, I can still play through their turn and end up getting rid of their bigger token, and so they don't one-shot me, unfortunately. But overall, I think all the hand traps came up fine. Out of this lineup, the Droll was probably the weakest link. Ash came up really good against Branded, against other decks. Valor was there, Imperms were really good. But overall, I do like this hand trap lineup, personally. And then for spells, it was 3 Boss Stage, 3 Prosperity, 2 Monstrosity, 2 Talents, and then 1 Call By, 1 Terraforming. boss stage, obviously you want to play at 3. It's the bread and butter of the deck. No excuses for playing 2 or 1 unless you're playing a janky variant of it with other engines. But Prosperity's great card in my opinion. I don't know how it's still at 3 because you banish 6. You can banish 3 or 6, then go deeper into your deck and then grab the card that you need. And then Monstrosity, people were kind of wondering why I was playing 2 Monstrosity. In my opinion, when I was running 3, it was bricking in my hand a lot, so I had to make the adjustment of running 2 to make it more unclunky, if you can say, like, if that's the word. But in my opinion, I liked it at 2. Like, I can use Prosperity to search it. Mostly people are running at 3 because they're running the Runic variant and they can't afford to use Prosperity in that deck because obviously you want to rather draw 3 or draw 2 with Runic Fountain. And then if you just draw into a Prosperity, it's just another dead card until the next following turn. But I like it at 2 because I had Prosperity to go for this further, like if this was in the deck, to try to go further into it so I can try to double hand rip my opponent at least. But if I couldn't, try to establish a really good board at least, or try to find a way into boss stage. Talents at 2 was good. I was thinking of running at 3, but 2 was perfectly fine, especially with the fact I was running Prosperity. So if they ash the Prosperity, it kills the fact that I can't draw 2, but getting to look at their hand is also rather strong. So I know what I can play around and also get to shuffle a card away, and then basically make them play on 4 cards when they draw a card for turn. And when Call By came up, especially when they try to ash my boss stage, or if they try to ash Lopter or Mardell, or even for follow-up, if they try to use a Unchained Monster effect, Call and Bind that Unchained Monster was also strong, in my opinion. But this card probably has to stay at 1 because at 3 it's just gonna be ridiculous, in my opinion. And then obviously 1 Terraforming because it gives you more boss stages in your hand. You want to see all the boss stages you can get. But eventually, if I'm going second, that card Terraforming usually does come out because I don't want to see in my hand going second. I rather see more impactful board breakers or more impactful cards going second instead of seeing a card where I don't want to activate to draw anything out. And then for the 1 trap, it's 1 boss fight, and what boss fight does is when it's activated, you can activate a Generator field spell from your deck or graveyard and then make your opponent draw a card. So most of the time, obviously it's boss stage because there's no other Generator field spell. So if you already have your board established from boss stage is a soft once per turn to summon a monster from deck. So if you already have your monster out and you still have a couple tokens left, you can go boss fight, make your opponent draw, activate another boss stage, and then you use boss stage again, summon out another monster. But the tokens are hard once per turn. So, but most of the time it's just to get another body on board, so you can also establish the crackback if you have to. But most of the time that's what you're gonna do because next turn you don't really want to give your opponent more turns depending on the deck you're facing, because certain decks can go the distance, and then this deck can kind of go the distance, but it can easily run out of materials as fast as possible. So you kind of want to establish your board, gain control, and then when you have the majority of the control, you want to be able to OTK your opponent before they can do anything to you. And then we'll go to the side deck. I have, for monsters, 3 Nib, 3 Ogre, 2 Crow, and then 1 Pankratops. Out of the monsters in my side deck, I was running more into using Nib, Crow, and Pankratops. Ogre was in there because I was afraid people were going to be running more Centurion at the event, because that deck gaining more popularity because of the fact that you can just make a Bane on your opponent's turn, and then just turn skip them. And turn skips are very rare to make in the game, so might as well use it now until Konami hopefully bans Bane, because that card is a menace to society, in my opinion. But Ogres usually will mostly stop Centurion because most of their monsters, when they're in the spell and trap zones, count as continuous trap cards. So being able to ogre them as well is really strong. You can't ogre their field spell when they have like Legatia on field, but able to ogring them hurts their deck a lot. So I brought it just in case, and I rarely ran into having to side in ogres. But most of the time I was siding in Pank, Crows, and Nibs. Pank came up a lot, especially because everyone was ending on an SP, and Pankratops itself is a card your opponent has to interact with, because if they don't interact with it, they're killing their SP, and then it's going to pop a card on their field too, which also it's basically a 2-for-1, and your opponent doesn't want to lose two of their cards from one of yours. So it forces an interaction, just like how Fenrir does. And then for the spells, only played 3, which was 1 Duster and 2 Cyclone. I was debating on playing Lightning Storms over Cyclone, but I was fearing I was going to run into the Unchained matchup, because Unchained it's still good right now. The ban list hasn't hit it, so people are going to play it until the ban list drops and the ban list hits it. Then they're not going to play it anymore, obviously. But if they don't hit it, then those cards are still going to see play, which is not alright. But I think Cyclones are probably the better one right now, because it also outs any floodgates your opponent will play. Just outs anything really. Any spell trap that you think is a threat to your board going second, or even if you have to set it, it also stops your opponent's field spells, stops anything like that if they try to go for follow-up. So I felt 1 Duster and 2 Cyclone were probably the perfect spells for spell trap removal that I need. And then for lastly, the traps, 3 Solemn Judgment. This card came up a couple of times playing second, or going first, and it's like I have no complaints about it. It's a strong card, pay half your life, but so hopefully I don't go too far with paying half my life where they can just swing over a Generator token and they call it games from there. But it came up once or twice, and that once or twice did help me winning the game, and I'm really appreciative that I did put this in there for going first, because it helped stop more impactful cards that would end up breaking my board. And then for the extra, for Xyz, it's 2 Leviton, 2 Jormungandr, 2 Enter Blathnir, the F-Zero package, 1 Zeus, 1 Typhon, 1 Earth Slicer, and 1 Sacred Tree Beast. I had no main issues with this lineup. The only thing is I didn't really run into Sacred Tree Beast a lot, or Typhon, but Typhon is a good card right now, and I'd rather be caught with it in my extra deck than I'll be caught without it. And I didn't really, because it's really good for the situational plays, but I didn't really run into the situational plays where I would have to make a Typhon. And Sacred Tree Beast, it's a really bad, like, it's not the worst card, but the fact that you can't use its negate until your opponent's turn also hurts, because if you set that up and you can't use it on your turn if your opponent attempts to nib you, and then it's just like a dead card, and I just needed an extra card in there. But I'm thinking about just taking it out, maybe putting like a IP Masquerena, so I can make an SP during my opponent's turn and be able to banish their stuff. But that's probably going to seem like the play, or look for like a better rank 9 that I can probably place in that can help clear boards and establish my board faster. But overall, I think it might be just might be fine, but if anyone doesn't have access to an IP or an SP, you also could just play like a third Leviathan, or maybe run since you don't have an SP, you could run like IP plus Abomination or IP plus Unicorn or Unicorn Access Code if you don't. But overall, I liked the lineup. And then for the last 3 cards, it was 1 Baron, 1 SP, and 1 Entis. SP, I don't understand how they decided to make this card. This card's ridiculous. But obviously, there's ways to easily out it. Baron, obviously, you want to play, because if you're playing the Diviner package, you want to play Baron. Baron is just a Omni Negate that helps establish your board, and they can also reborn level 9 or lower. So it makes it even better if you have Mardell or a other level 9 engrave, and you can just reborn that level 9. It's also really good. And then Entis didn't come up at all, really. I ended up banishing it off of Prosperity a lot, because some of the decks I didn't really rely on using Diviner to send Entis, because some of their cards would gives them more advantage if they got destroyed by a card effect. So I might keep it in there just in case, because Dogmatica Fire Kings is becoming a deck lately. So if they do try to Maximus me, at least I'll be able to have a interaction where I can at least pop one of their cards, even though popping one of their cards gives them card advantage. So it might come out, it might stay in. I'm in the lab right now, debating if I want to play it in the extra deck or not, but I'd rather have it in the deck than not, just in case it did come up. So, but overall, I love this deck. Probably one of my favorite decks of all time of playing this throughout my entire career in Yu-Gi-Oh!, even though it's like a short time. Really happy that this deck was my first ever top at a regional. Appreciative of the fact that I was able to play this deck and perform extremely well. I was coming into the regional with 0 expectations, but luckily I had luck on my side, and I felt like it was the meta call, because obviously certain players aren't going to know what this deck does, so it gives you the advantage of your opponent not knowing what your deck does. But most of my opponents I played there had knowledge of what my deck does, so it was just knowing the matchup better, and then trying to make sure I'm playing correctly and not misplaying. I did happen to misplay a little bit, and it did cost me the games, but I didn't want to get angry and then get frustrated about losing. I wanted to move on and just relax, and then just learn from my mistakes, and then have those mistakes turn into better plays where I can actually win games, and it helped me. Felt calm, cool, collected. But shout outs to my buddies Mario, Ben, Brad, Hugo, Avery, Sal, Joey, Sammy, Victor,